guys, in this video we're going to be talking about some Ruby basics, specifically classes, instance variables, and methods, and we're going to be building a tic-tac-toe game to show you how they work. Now, tic-tac-toe at the base level is the idea of a game where you have a 9-square grid, and two players, one is an X, one is an O, and they each take turns filling in squares with their letter until one of them gets 3 in a row or the entire board is full and it's a draw. So it's pretty straightforward, but that is where we would want to create a tic-tac-toe class to represent the game. Think of a class as a template that every version of the game would start from. So every time that you sit down and play a game with your friend, that is a specific instance of the game. You might have a winner, you might be just starting the game, you might have a draw. So you might be able to create multiple games. So with this in Ruby, we can do that by saying tic-tac-toe.new to create a new instance of the game. This is a specific copy of the game that has 2 players, and it might be in any state in the game, but it's separate from every other game. So we can create a second game, like game 2 or game 3, and they will all be independent, but they will all be tic-tac-toe games. So you might have 3 games going on simultaneously. Imagine a chess tournament where there are a bunch of people playing their chess games and they're all happening at the same time and they don't overlap each other. You're not, moving pieces on someone else's board. They're all independent, but they're all chess games operating at the same time. So that's kind of the difference between a class and an instance. So these variables that we have here, game 2, and game 3 are all instances of a tic-tac-toe game. And when you call .new on a class, it will try to look for an initialize method, and you can pass in some optional parameters. We don't really need any for this case, but we might want to. And we can say anything we want in here, and typically it's setup code. So the first one is probably we want to set up a board. And the way that I'm going to do this is we're going to have an array of 9 places in it, and we will have that set to nil for each one of those. That means that the space is empty and can be used by a player. So this board is going to keep track of those in one single array. So if we were to move this onto one line, you would see it's an array with 9 items in it. The reason I split it onto new lines every 3 is just so that you can reference that and keep track of this a little bit easier in your head. Spot number 1, or array position 0, is going to be the top left corner. The top middle is the position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there are 9 squares going from 0 to 8. We'll have users type in 1 through 9 and we'll just subtract 1 to put it in the right place. But that board will be nice and organized, and keeping it more simple by using a single flat array. It'll be more compact in our app and easier to work with. We'll also have our 2 players, and we'll put those in an empty array at the beginning because we won't have any players just yet. But this will create a basic tic-tac-toe game. So this will create a game with 0 players and nothing on the board. We will want to be able to add players to the game, and maybe we get an error if we try and add 3 players to the game or whatever. But this is going to be our foundation for that. So with that said, we can create these variables as instance variables. So when we put an @ symbol before a variable name, we are making an instance variables. And you'll see in my editor that it's highlighted orange because these instance variables are contained inside of the tic-tac-toe instance. So inside of this code here, we could assign these to game, game, and game. And this one would override the first one, this one would override the second one, and there would only end up being 1 copy of game in our main Ruby code here. However, when we're doing instance variables, these are kept unique to the instance. So what we would have here is 3 tic-tac-toe games, and each one of these games will have a separate board and a separate array of players. So that's going to keep it nice and organized internally so that we never have players overriding each other, or boards where you pick a square and it updates the board on someone else's game. You don't want that. So the instance variables help you keep those contained inside of the instance of the class. So these instance variables are not available outside of your instance. So if we were to update our code here and try and print out the game's players or the game's board, we will get an error if we run that code. We'll see undefined method players for tic-tac-toe. Because this is an instance variable, it's not a method. Anything outside of the instance cannot ask for those instance variables, so they can never find out the internal workings of that class. That's definitely a very good thing to have, but sometimes you might want to let people know who is playing in your game. So you could say players as a method and expose and return the @players instance variable so other people can see that. So if we were to run this, this will cause an error. So we'll comment out the board. But here you can see that our players is an empty array. So now we're making it so that anyone else could ask for the state of this game or what players are available in it. So we could do the same thing for the board by saying, let's return @board and expose that so that other people can ask the game for what the board looks like. Well, in this case, we have no players and an empty board. Pretty straightforward. But that's how you would expose these to being available to the outside world. Another shortcut for this is @reader, where you can say players and board, and that @reader will actually just simply define these methods. It will take the name that you give it as the symbol in purple up here. It will define a method for you with the same name and return the instance variable with that same name. So if we were to get rid of these entirely, we could now print out game.players and game.board, and it's going to print those out just like before. So it's just a handy shortcut that Ruby has that you can use inside of your classes. @reader is going to expose those so other people can read them. @writer players would allow other people to set the players variable. So it would define a method like players equals and a new value, and it would set @players equal to that value. So here, if we wanted to say game.players and then game.players equals 1, we could print out game.players. And actually, let's just use an example of like X. So now you can see that that has allowed us to set the players from outside of that class. So we're doing that outside of the instance, and we are able to update that variable now. Now, if you're doing an @reader and an @writer, you can do @accessor for players, which will define both of those for you. So if we were to get rid of both of those, then our code will still work, and that's going to define the player's getter and setter methods. So that would define the player's method, like so, for the reader and the writer, like you see there. So we could remove that and do whatever we wanted, but we're going to just set this up to be @readers, and that will make that available. Now, the side benefit to this is that you can actually use the players method inside of your instance anywhere you want. So you could say players like so, and that would return the @players variable. So it's just kind of an alias to that if you want to use it internal. But the main purpose of that is to make methods that are publicly available so other people can ask for the game's players and board and so on. So let's go dive into actually building out our game in the next episode.